Can you imagine what it's like for someone who is hated by every single person in the world to feel constantly the things they have to go through? Even though many people in the world think Prince Andrew is the worst of the worst, there is still a story that you don't know. Watch this video till the end to find the heartbreaking news of Prince Andrew. He was born into a palace that insisted nothing could ever touch him. Yet every silence inside those walls told a different story. From the first moment he opened his eyes, Andrew was treated as a symbol of stability for a family that desperately needed one. His childhood unfolded under chandeliers, military ceremonies, private tutors, and a mother who carried the weight of an entire kingdom. People later said he was her favorite, but favoritism in a royal home does not always feel like love. Sometimes it feels like pressure, dressed as privilege. Sometimes it feels like approval that can disappear if you breathe wrong. His early years were shaped by a schedule that never allowed him to be a person. He learned to speak before he learned to be understood. He learned to salute before he learned to trust. He learned to keep his feelings contained because feelings were considered weaknesses, and weaknesses were forbidden. Every photo from his childhood shows the same distant calm, the same controlled expression, the same practiced presence that hid whatever he wished someone would ask him about. He grew up surrounded by servants, yet rarely by softness. He had siblings, yet rarely companionship. Duty replaced intimacy. Expectations replaced conversation. By the time he reached adolescence, the public already had an image of who he should be. He was shaped to be confident, bold, loyal, and unquestionably obedient to the institution he represented. In reality, he was becoming a young man who mistook applause for affection. He developed a hunger for validation that came from being trained to believe his worth was measured by the attention he received. That hunger became a weakness long before anyone noticed it. It was the kind of weakness that powerful people can exploit, and someone eventually did. Inside Buckingham Palace, he was always aware that his mother carried the world on her shoulders, and he carried the expectation of being the one child who would never disappoint her. That image followed him everywhere. It shaped how he behaved, what he desired, and what he tolerated. He learned that mistakes were not allowed. He learned that pain had to be kept private. He learned that failure was not just personal, it was national. When a child grows into an adult, believing he is not permitted to fall, the eventual fall becomes catastrophic. His relationship with his father was kind of toxic. He was forced to accept a cold shoulder more than closeness. Prince Philip respected strength, discipline, and emotional restraint. Andrew grew up believing he needed to mirror those qualities to earn approval. Any part of him that struggled was pushed deeper inside. Years later, people close to the family admitted that Andrew often seemed lost, even as a young man, but no one dared to say it out loud. Royals are trained to ignore their fractures until those fractures create irreversible damage. As he moved into adulthood, he carried this silent fragility behind the confident stride that cameras loved. The military became the first place he felt genuinely powerful, because uniforms erase identity and replace it with purpose. He fought in the Falklands War and returned with stories he refused to discuss and injuries he claimed not to feel. When he later said he struggled with physical reactions like sweating, everyone laughed. No one considered the possibility that the trauma he carried from the war had been buried so deeply that even he no longer understood what it had done to him. His life after the war became a blend of royal duty, public adoration, and the kind of isolation that creeps in when you realize the applause is not meant for you, but for the title attached to your name. He entered relationships that tried to anchor him, but every relationship collided with the demands of the monarchy. Friends came and went. Advisors circled him with warnings he never followed. The palace became both his safety net and his cage. He could not leave, yet he could not breathe inside it. By the time he met the people who would later drag him into the darkest chapter of his life, he was already emotionally vulnerable. He needed admiration. He needed a sense of relevance. He needed someone who made him feel seen, without reminding him of the expectations he had carried since birth. That need became the doorway through which danger entered. He was easy to flatter and even easier to manipulate. The royal bubble had protected him from consequences for so long that he never recognized a threat until it was too late. None of the heartbreak that would follow began with a scandal. It began with a lifetime of unspoken wounds. It began with a family that raised him to be a representation rather than a person. It began with a childhood filled with grandeur and emptiness at the same time. The world saw a prince who seemed confident. The palace saw a son who needed guidance. The truth was that he grew into a man unprepared to understand risk, loyalty, or vulnerability. That unpreparedness shaped every decision he made. The tragedy of his story is not simply what he lost. It is how none of the warning signs were ever addressed. If anyone had stopped to ask who he was beneath the uniform, beneath the title, beneath the smile, the future might have unfolded differently. Instead, he moved through life with an invisible weight that only increased with time. He believed he was untouchable because he needed to believe it. He needed it to survive the expectations that shadowed him. That belief would eventually destroy him, but the roots of that destruction were planted long before the world realized he was falling. At the end of the day, one thing was clear: the walls of privilege could not shield him forever. The vulnerabilities carved by childhood and war left him exposed, craving approval, craving relevance. And then he met the people who would exploit that fragility. Connections meant to elevate him would soon become the very chains that dragged him into darkness. He met Jeffrey Epstein long before he claimed. According to biographer Andrew Loney, Andrew's ties to Epstein stretch back to the early 1990s, not just 1999 as publicly stated. Epstein didn't just flatter him, he played him. The prince, in Loney's words, was easy prey for a rattlesnake. Epstein needed what Andrew offered: status, royal access, diplomatic doors. Andrew needed something, someone who would bankroll his mistakes, his debts, and his pleasures. That someone sculpted Andrew's world. Epstein introduced him to a series of contacts: political leaders, oligarchs, women, and people who could elevate the prince beyond ceremonial roles. Through Epstein, Andrew found a twisted kind of mentorship: glamorous dinners, private island invitations, luxurious business deals. Loney claims Epstein once said Andrew was the most intimate friend he had. "There's only one person who likes more than me, and that's Andrew." Their bond deepened through Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell wasn't a peripheral figure. She was central. According to Loney, Andrew and Maxwell didn't just socialize, they had an on-off affair. She played both confidant and fixer. She rebuilt him when he was adrift after leaving the Royal Navy, helped him shape his social calendar, and pulled him deeper into Epstein's web. That web was darker and more deliberate than the fairy tale parties. In New York, Epstein's driver, Ivan Novikov, allegedly recalled driving Andrew with two young women, both under 18, doing cocaine, to a hotel. According to Loney, Epstein was not only supplying Andrew with access to women, but also keeping tabs on his vulnerabilities. Andrew's private life was an open book, and Epstein sold pages of it. Loney writes that Epstein passed intimate secrets about the prince to foreign intelligence agencies, Mossad, Saudi intelligence, even Libyan services. This was not friendship. This was prey and predator. Epstein manipulated on multiple levels. He dangled connections. He bankrolled. He entertained. He recorded. And Andrew, whether through craving validation, wealth, or power, let himself be drawn in. Loney argues that Epstein exploited Andrew's greed. The prince had mounting debts, partly due to his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. Epstein paid for Ferguson's bills. Epstein also promised access to women, a supply of them, according to Loney. The power imbalance was plain. Epstein cast Andrew as a useful idiot. He gave Andrew legitimacy. Andrew gave Epstein royalty. They served each other, but not equally. According to Loney, Epstein believed he could control Andrew, and he did. The deeper the relationship went, the more dangerous it became. Spies grew wary. Loney's book suggests that British intelligence and possibly foreign agencies suspected Epstein was grooming Andrew for blackmail. Epstein, in Loney's narrative, was not just a financier, he was a spider with a web of compromat. It wasn't just about money or sex. Epstein recognized Andrew's weaknesses emotionally, financially, and socially, and used them. He knew Andrew craved validation from his family, from power. He knew the prince's public image was fragile, his private life porous. And Andrew wasn't just complicit, he was vulnerable. Maxwell, Loney writes, introduced him to women, but also subtly controlled which women. Maxwell brokered business deals, a tobacco deal in Malawi, a luxury car deal in Thailand. Through her, Epstein gave Andrew a taste of influence, but also ensured Andrew was tethered to him. In that tethering, Epstein planted his roots. According to Loney, there were at least 7 numbers saved in Epstein's little black book for Andrew. He had Andrew's secrets, his desires, his patterns. That kind of intimacy comes with power, and for Epstein, that meant leverage. The manipulation wasn't invisible. Loney quotes people close to Andrew describing the prince as naive, reckless, too easy to impress. Epstein, the predator, smiled at how easy his prey was. Loney says Andrew gave him respectability, access to political leaders, and business opportunities. There was also a whisper of blackmail. Some sources in Loney's book claim Epstein traded Andrew's most intimate secrets, photos, perhaps more, with foreign intelligence services. The very foundations of Andrew's life, his royal identity, his public face, were being used as currency. Yet even while being used, Andrew believed he was gaining something. He saw Epstein as a lifeline for his finances, his reckless desires, his ambition. Epstein offered him a world he longed for, not just parties, but influence, women, travel, and access. Loney argues that Andrew's weaknesses made him ideal prey. The tragedy is in the inequality. Epstein's friendship was not a match of equals. It was a transaction. Andrew baked his insecurities into the bargain, thinking he was trading for freedom, but Epstein was the one pulling the strings. By the time their relationship soured publicly, Andrew was emotionally depleted. He had given Epstein more than loyalty. He had given him himself. Epstein, in turn, had woven a web so tight that breaking free would come at a cost. And the cost was humiliation, exposure, and leverage. Andrew had opened his world to someone who didn't just want him, he wanted to own him. The The private indulgences and whispered dealings were no longer confined to secret rooms. Documents, testimonies, and photographs emerged, revealing the grotesque reality behind closed doors. The world began to see not just mistakes, but a pattern of exploitation, manipulation, and coercion. Proof that his fall had already begun in earnest. In 2024, a tranche of previously sealed court documents was unsealed in the US, and one of the most jarring revelations came from Johanna Sjoberg, a former assistant of Epstein. She described a bizarre and humiliating scene inside Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2001. Sjoberg testified that Ghislaine Maxwell led her and Virginia Giuffre to a closet where they brought out a puppet, a caricature of Prince Andrew, clearly labeled with his name. She said the puppet looked like him, as if it were a grotesque doppelganger made for Epstein's twisted amusement. Then came the photograph. Giuffre on the couch with the puppet in her lap, Sjoberg on Andrew's lap. According to her, they put the puppet's hand on Virginia's breast, and Andrew put his hand on my breast, and they took a photo. She remembered nothing playful or innocent, just a chilling moment of power, control, and violation. Maxwell, when asked under oath, admitted there was a caricature of Andrew in Epstein's home, but she claimed she didn't recall placing her hand on Sjoberg's breast. The rope of her memory was thin. She said she couldn't be precise, but the puppet was real. This testimony didn't just shock, it shattered the image of Andrew as merely reckless or naive. The unsealed files showed more, including a motion in which Jane Doe No. 3 claimed she was forced to have sexual relations with Andrew in 3 locations: London, New York, and Epstein's private island. According to court records, she alleged an orgy with numerous underage girls. In his 2022 settlement with Virginia Giuffre, Andrew never admitted guilt. His lawyer's joint letter to the court stated that he never intended to malign her, and while he expressed regret for his association with Epstein, he offered no admission of wrongdoing. But in that same agreement, he committed to make a substantial donation to Giuffre's charity supporting victims' rights. The world saw a prince paying millions, apologizing for association, but not for actions, a non-apology wrapped in legal safeguards. The settlement was filed in Manhattan federal court. Within days, a judge signed a stipulation dismissing the case, formally ending the lawsuit. The dismissal came with a price, but no verdict, no public trial, no sworn testimony from Andrew under oath. Meanwhile, the unsealed documents threatened to resurrect the darkest parts of his history. Media coverage exploded. CBS, BBC, Sky News, Fox, everyone relived Sjoberg's testimony. The puppet incident became a grim symbol, not just allegations, but grotesque proof of how far he had fallen, how deeply he had been enmeshed. As the world watched, the Met Police in the UK announced they had no immediate plans to launch a new investigation. Their statement echoed with chilling restraint. Should new and relevant information come, we will assess it. For many, that was too little, too late. Public opinion shattered. Royal watchers, previously willing to dismiss Andrew's Epstein friendship as a foolish lapse, could no longer ignore the magnitude of what surfaced. The puppet photo, that surreal, perverse snapshot, became a rallying cry among critics. It wasn't just a scandal, it was trauma made visible. For Andrew, the moment was a reckoning. He could no longer hide behind privilege or claims of naivety. His legacy, always fragile, began to fracture. The puppet was more than a toy. It was a mirror, twisted, mocking, reflecting twisted power dynamics, corruption, and abuse. And for the victims, the unsealing of these documents validated their wounds. Sjoberg's testimony, long buried, was finally laid bare. Jeffrey's fight, once silenced by a settlement, now had its echoes in the public record. The pain they carried for years in private is now laid bare, raw and unforgiving. Exposure brought consequences. Scandals once hidden became public reckoning. Titles, privileges, and honors, the symbols of a lifetime, were now in jeopardy. What remained was not just humiliation, but exile, mental strain, and the brutal dismantling of identity. The prince would soon discover that the crown could also be the sword that severs. He fell not merely because of scandal, but he was stripped of everything that once made him a prince. In November 2025, King Charles issued letters patent under the Great Seal of the realm. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor would no longer be styled His Royal Highness or hold the title of Prince, and his Duke of York was formally removed. This wasn't a symbolic rebuke, it was a surgical severing of identity. The crown exercised its prerogative. No act of parliament, no debate. Just a decision, a signature, a cut. He's no longer referred to as Prince Andrew. Now, he is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a name stripped of pomp, a name tethered to exile. But the dethronement was only the beginning of his undoing. Forced to surrender the lease on Royal Lodge, his longtime home, he's being relocated to a more modest property on King Charles's Sandringham estate. The house may be smaller, but the humiliation feels infinitely larger, a physical exile mirroring his fall from grace. Sources close to the palace say Charles feels a duty of care toward his younger brother now. Even after stripping him of his honors, Charles worries Andrew's mental health is collapsing under the weight of disgrace. Royal insiders say Andrew has been holed up at Royal Lodge in the weeks since, and that Fergie, his ex-wife, is still living nearby, is also under tremendous strain. One insider claims Andrew broke down when reading Charles's formal statement. He fixated on the phrase, "The king has been pleased." To him, it sounded less like a duty fulfilled than a personal vendetta. He wept in fury, as though the crown had broken his heart, rather than just his title. The loss of status is not merely public, it is internal, deeply, painfully personal. He's not just ousted, he's erased. The ceremonial roles, the honors, Order of the Garter, Royal Victorian Order, all stripped or put into dormancy. Even his honorary naval rank, Vice Admiral, has been confirmed for removal. He clings to remnants. His South Atlantic Medal for Falklands service remains, the one vestige that cannot be removed. But the medal feels like a ghost, a memory of a life before the collapse. What he once took for granted, prestige, respect, and legitimacy, is gone. In its place, isolation, regret, and the deep ache of displacement. His brother's move was not just political, it was piercing. Charles didn't just remove titles, he disowned the role Andrew played in the monarchy. Behind closed doors, there's fear, not about his reputation, but about his fragile psyche. Royal sources say both Andrew and Fergie are feeling the strain, that friends are worried he could break entirely. A single misstep now could send him spiraling, not into another scandal, but into something far darker. The dramatics of his public life now feel cruelly poetic. A man born with privilege, now unmoored, stripped of the very symbols that once defined him. His legacy, once gilded, now lies in fragments. Yet even as the crown cuts him loose, Andrew insists he acted out of duty, that he's doing this for his family, for the monarchy. He vigorously denies the accusations, framing it as a sacrifice. But the public hears something else. A fall. Not just of a man, but of a tragic figure who misjudged his own strength. As November 2025 closes, the weight of exile crushes him more visibly than ever. He is no longer a prince, stripped of titles, honors, and even the Duke of York designation. His home at Royal Lodge has been surrendered, replaced by a modest estate on Sandringham, a gilded cage shrunk to confinement. The world watches as his social universe collapses. London's elite private clubs have banned him, leaving him isolated from the very circles he once navigated effortlessly. In the United States, lawmakers express frustration and disbelief at his silence, urging him to testify in the shadow of Jeffrey Epstein's legacy, a reminder that the scandal is not yet finished haunting him. Friends and family whisper about his fragile state, the strain too great to hide, the humiliation too complete to bear. A man born into royalty now drifts unmoored, a casualty of expectation, choice, and consequence, exposed in every dimension, publicly, privately, and painfully. For a lifetime, he wore his titles like armor. Now, the armor is gone, and he is exposed, vulnerable. Someone who once moved through royal corridors with ease now tiptoes through guilt, uncertainty, and exile. The cost is not just in prestige, it is in identity, in loneliness, in the finality of being stripped of what made him royal. The world looks on, but he sits in a hollow house, perhaps hoping that one day someone will see the man behind the scandal and understand that this fall was more than a downfall. It was a reckoning. And as the dust settles, one fact remains. The prince is gone. All that is left is Andrew, stripped, unadorned, and painfully human.